Livingston, Jackson, Parker, Good, Reynolds, and members of the Georgia Association of Teacher Educators, I'm honored to have been invited to address the 2026 CAPE Conference. Thank you and good morning.
Good morning.
When people ask me what I do for a living, and they learn that I'm a college professor, their first response is to ask me what I teach. When I answer that I'm in the field of education, they sometimes look confused until I tell them I teach teachers how to teach. Then they typically look down and they offer their condolences before noting how important my role is for the greater good of society, or some such thing. But what does it really mean to teach teachers? There's a lot of acreage in our field. Are we talking about disseminating facts, sharing pedagogy, writing lesson plans, teaching content delivery? I became a teacher in January 1990 in no small part thanks to the Grateful Dead. It's true. After finishing undergraduate degrees in music and psychology in June of '89, I quickly learned that neither of those made me employable in any field other than those generic professions whose job descriptions began with the words, requires a 4-year degree. So I took a job making sandwiches in a deli at the corner of 3rd and Cherry Streets in downtown Macon. This is where I learned how folks who didn't go to college lived. I learned a lot about life working in a deli, working in a kitchen. Every college graduate should be so fortunate as to gain the perspective of working in food service, on a landscape crew, under a house, or on a roof after graduation. It teaches humility. It teaches what my father called a hard day's work. At the time, I figured working in a kitchen was as good a job as any, being that my mom had just cut me off in the rent department with rent due in 2 weeks. You graduated last month, didn't you, son? And being a musician, I could also continue to raise funds, moonlighting on occasion with the Macon Symphony Orchestra. Between these two minimum wage jobs, deli worker and trained symphonic musician, I was able to somehow pay the rent. That October, I was offered tickets to see the Grateful Dead play 2 nights in Charlotte. I wasn't a deadhead, and I didn't really know many of their songs, but I was definitely up for a new experience. So I accepted the tickets. Now I had to figure out how to get away with missing a couple of days' work in a job I had just begun. Like any red-blooded American kid presented with such a dilemma, I lied to my employer and told them that I would be playing with the Macon Symphony in Charlotte. That excuse somehow worked, and I got the days off. Anyway, after 2 days of Dead shows and a weekend for the ages, I returned to work to learn that while I had been away, one of our customers, a lady who worked at the local BOE, asked the lady who worked at the cash register where the kid who made her sandwich every day was. Okay, they got to talking. My coworker explained, oh, he's got a psychology degree from Mercer. He's away playing with the symphony. The customer said, well, if he has a psych degree, he may be eligible to teach students with behavior disorders. Give him my card. Okay? When she handed me the card, I laughed. I stuffed the card in my apron and went back to cutting up chickens. I did call the ladies who had given me the card the next day. A few weeks later, I was the 8th grade self-contained behavior disorders teacher at Miller Middle School. When I interviewed with the principal and he learned that I was also a drummer, he pulled out a pair of drumsticks and we played paradiddles together on top of his desk. At the end of that rhythmic conversation, he told me I had gotten the job. And I could start as soon as my provisional certificate paperwork had come through. This obviously was a master class in how to hire quality teachers, right? The only problem was I didn't know jack about teaching. As I was leaving the principal's office the Friday before I was supposed to begin the following Monday, I asked him if he might at least lend me some textbooks. He turned to the secretary, told her to get me a set of books. And I went home and I crammed 8th grade over the weekend. On a cold Monday morning in January 1990, I would open those books and start each academic subject on page 1. Made sense to me. As if one could not see this train wreck coming. My first day as a teacher was an epic disaster. On my caseload were 12 boys, most of whom were taller than me. They didn't look like me either. I was only 5 years older than my oldest student, who was a 16-year-old 8th grader. These guys were some really tough characters. 5 minutes into instruction, the penis joke started, and things went downhill from there. I remember repeating over and over in my head during that first morning, these guys are real jerks, but do not quit. Do not quit. Make it to lunch. Then quit. That's really what I was thinking. By lunch, I talked myself into staying the rest of the day. That's when I would go up to the office to submit my resignation. I wasn't even going to ask for a paycheck. I figured I'd donate that day's work for the good of duty and humanity and move on with my life. By the end of the day, I challenged myself to make it to the end of the week. By the end of the week, I had fallen in love with the kids and decided to finish out the year. How did this happen? Because while talking to each kid one-on-one, I realized that beneath the tough guy facades, which were shields really, there was something cool inside each of these kids. This kid liked Michael Jordan. I was from Chicago, I could relate to that. This other kid was a heckling artist. This kid over here liked Batman, okay? This guy over here was philosophical and witty, and he had a lot of thinking going on in his head. As I began to see them as individuals, I realized that I had already begun to develop relationships with each one of them. There are plenty of takeaways from this whole experience. The most obvious is that I had no business being in a classroom. I was woefully unprepared. I was a special education teacher who didn't even know what an IEP was. Knowing what I know now, I shake my head at how careless it was to put somebody like me in front of students. Real, live, breathing students. And then close the door? I mean, God only knows how many ways that situation could have gone sideways, right? As if isn't already obvious, the pre-service teachers that we produce in teacher education programs today are infinitely more prepared to go into the classroom than I ever was. There's also a flip side to my story, in that though I was not prepared formally in any way, I somehow still was successful in the classroom despite my lack of formal preparation. And this was not because I was extraordinary by any means. I graduated with a 2.96 GPA, and some of my C's might as well have arrived either with sympathy cards or in boxes wrapped with bows because they were clearly gifts. Let's think about it. What might make the success of someone with no formal teacher preparation tell us? Maybe there's more than one way to be a teacher. Maybe schools of education aren't the only viable path. A popular thing to share in this room, of course. Perhaps at the end of the day, all roads lead to Rome. This morning, I have no desire to discuss traditional educator preparation pedagogy. As will be evident over the next couple of days, there are far greater minds than mine in this room who are capable of presenting best practices in delivering instruction. I'm not here to discuss the science of teaching students. Instead, I'd like to discuss the art of reaching students. This is the other half of what we do, or perhaps what we should be doing. When we educate pre-service teachers, I'm talking about the intangible role we as faculty play in our students' lives. In my view, the art of reaching students involves empowering our pre-service teachers to impact their own students way beyond the delivery of instruction. I've come to believe that reaching kids is infinitely more important than the academic content we teach. Please don't misunderstand. I fully recognize and respect the essential value of pedagogical research. I fully recognize that. My point is that there may be a whole other layer. There may be an entire thing beyond this to consider. For the next few minutes, I ask that you lay aside the mechanics of teaching and consider the possibility that the most important things we faculty teachers teach, pre-service teachers, may have nothing to do with academics, lesson delivery, curricula, or pedagogy. They got to the teachers of your youth. Who impacted you? How? Did that impact have anything to do with the academic content on the board? Or did it have to do with how they made you feel as a human being? Over the course of my 35 years in our field, first learning to be a teacher, then observing teachers, supervising teachers, and eventually teaching them, I've come to conclude that the best teachers are those who build relationships with other people. They see every kid as a human worthy of investing their time, and then they start building bridges to each of them. They take the time to learn the interests, personality, culture, and family dynamics of the kids they teach. This part must happen first if they are ever to address the unique learning needs of the kids sitting before them. Building community among the class that no one wanted to teach. The class I inherited during my first year teaching had already run off a teacher before I arrived in mid-January. I knew her name was Miss Collins only because the students told me 50 times that first morning that they wanted her to come back. At a certain point, I started muttering, yeah, me too. In the years since, I've asked myself how I managed to build relationships among this tough group with no experience. The truth is, folks, I just lucked out. It was no doubt beginner's luck, just dumb luck. I accidentally got the little things right. Starting with building trust. Because I didn't know what I didn't know about classroom management, I just tried stuff until I found solutions that worked. One thing I know for sure is that my students were the most misunderstood group of kids in the school. Yes, they had behavior disorders. Yes, they had difficulty regulating their emotions at times. However, they weren't the sociopaths others assumed them to be. These were great kids that other teachers just must not have taken the time to really get to know. All they needed was an advocate. Heck, I could advocate. I actually got mad on their behalf when I saw other adults write them off as ineducable. I was their teacher, darn it. And an offense against them was an offense against me. I was 21, bulletproof, and ready to stand up to anybody. That's the moment it became us, my students and me, against the world. If a kid was self-conscious about doing a math problem on the board in front of the class, I brought him up to my desk, let him do it for me. Once he got it right, I allowed him to go to the board and display it publicly. I tried to avoid holding kids up to ridicule. I learned from a gentleman named Terry Alderman that if we teachers don't allow a student to save face, he will save his own. My kid's biggest fear was being outed as special ed students when leaving my trailer between classes. They didn't want to be stigmatized. So we adjusted the time that they departed the classroom so that they wouldn't run into their general ed peers in between the trailer and the building. Problem solved. My students had ants in your pants levels of ADHD. So when lunchtime arrived and they needed to expend energy, I raced my kids from my trailer across the parking lot into the lunchroom in the main building, laughing the whole way. My class could sprint. And other teachers finally quit yelling at them to slow down once they saw me leading the pack. Just as guilty as the rest. I imagine there was some head shaking among my new colleagues. But the important thing was that my students had begun to trust me. When my kids were stir crazy and could not calm down on Friday afternoons, I found a way to use their nervous energy for my desired result. which was peace and quiet. So I created a world heavyweight championship of quiet, complete with a homemade professional wrestling belt. World heavyweight champion of quiet. What kid does not want to hold the belt up at the end of the week over their heads? These kids would almost kill themselves to keep their lips zipped without talking that last hour of the day on Fridays. It became their favorite activity of the week. Okay, the weekly winner won the ice cream of his choice on me the following Monday. To date, it remains the best 50 cents I have ever spent on anything. We read together, we did math together, we watched science films together. We had heart-to-heart conversations about what it was like to grow up in their neighborhoods. We even painted our classroom together, because nobody cares if you paint the walls in a trailer. I'd sit cross-legged on top of my desk with an open book, and we'd take turns reading aloud. If a kid reached a word he couldn't pronounce, I'd ask who wants to help him out. And whoever said the word first received a bonus point for helping a friend in need. Without really knowing what we were doing, we accidentally created a culture where it was cool, where it was rewarding to open doors for adults, to get quiet when the intercom buzzed, and to say yes ma'am and thank you to the people who prepared our meals. People across the building began to notice that my kids actually could be charming. One day, Miller cafeteria manager, Mrs. Mary Twilley, came to me and said gently, "Rob, I need you to let you know that your tall kid has been sneaking in the side door of the kitchen to steal cinnamon rolls from the baking rack every morning. I wasn't a fan of stealing, so I set up my own sting operation. I busted this kid red-handed. Okay? When I took him aside afterward to ask what in the world he was thinking, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. He said, "Mr. S, I wasn't thinking. I was hungry. This is where I eat." I tore the office referral in half. Of course he was hungry. The real question should have been, what was I thinking? I sure blew that one, and I felt about 6 inches tall. All I had proven was how little I had invested in getting to know the home lives of my students. Have I mentioned that our profession can sometimes humble a person? That opened up yet another project for me to work on. You get the point. Now, not every single day in trailer room 276 was great. We shared far more joy than tears. In all candor, my kids were not the sole beneficiaries of this student-teacher relationship. I confess, I totally capitalized on our connection when it came time for teacher observations. I figured out which week the principal was observing the teachers in the trailers. Okay? And I would tell my class about his pending visit in advance. No one else did that. Couldn't figure it out. I also took the liberty to adjust the reason for the principal's visit. I told the class I was so proud of their progress that I had personally invited the principal to come in and see how smart my kids were. That's when one kid looked up and said to me, "He really wants to come see us?" They weren't used to being wanted. "Oh yeah," I said. "I've been telling him I got the smartest class in the whole school, and I asked him to please come see y'all in action being smart." So if he walks in that door, you know what to do, fellas. This is your moment to shine. Man, I wish I had saved those teacher observations. As for me, my career progressed. I added degrees, became an assistant principal, behavior specialist, and eventually moved into central office, where situations tended to have more gravity. In 2004, I became director of student safety for the school district, where I oversaw administrative investigations, crisis management, and allegations of employee and student misconduct for 25,000 students and 3,800 employees. One morning in March 2010, my office received a call about a loaded handgun being found in an elementary school. It wasn't the first handgun we had. But upon arrival, we learned that morning an elementary student had notified the staff that one of his classmates had shown him a handgun, first on the bus and later in the classroom. A campus police officer found the loaded Glock in a third grader's desk. We placed the school on lockdown, the weapon was secured, and the student was transported to the youth detention center. This situation was resolved with little fanfare. It never escalated into a national news story about another terrible tragedy. Why? Because a kid with a conscience who saw a gun sought out a trusted teacher. That trust didn't just happen. Trust never just happens. In this case, the teacher had taken the time to establish a relationship with this kid. That led him to trust her during a moment of crisis. Now, sometimes imagine what could have happened had that relationship between the teacher and student not been positive. How does all of this apply to what you and I now do in higher education? I believe teacher-student bonds are just as important at the college level as they are in the P-12 world. It's all about investment. And I'm not referring to money or budgets. The type of investment I'm talking about is infinitely more valuable than dollars. Every moment that we consciously connect with another human being in this life is an investment. When you stop a student in the hallway or ask them to hang back after class because you noticed something was a little off, that's an investment. You're sending a message that says you care. When you and I invest our time and energy in these relationships, we really are saying, I don't know what is going on in your life right now, but you matter, and I'm here if you need somebody to talk to. You're sending that message. This is profoundly important at the college level. The statistics detailing the levels of depression and anxiety among our college students are both staggering and sobering. They tell us that our students desperately need faculty who are willing to invest in them, their time, energy, maybe even a little wisdom. I was a loser in undergrad. I didn't have any direction, and I had even less commitment. I was a first-generation college kid taking classes because somebody told me that that's what I was supposed to do. And I drank like a fish. In 1986, a professor named Mary Ann Drake tapped me on the shoulder as I was attempting to slide past her and out the door at the end of her developmental psychology class. She asked me if I had a minute to hang back and talk. Uh-oh. Somewhat skulkingly, I followed her down the short hallway to her office. She sat me down and asked me what was up. This lady had an inscribed signed photo from B.F. Skinner hanging from the wall behind her desk. It was pretty cool. When I assured her that all was quiet on the Western Front, she offered an amused smile and shook her head. She wasn't having it, and I was not getting off that easily. Dr. Drake said she'd heard that I'd been partying pretty hard and asked me how she could help. I sheepishly admitted to some unhealthy habits and a less than stellar slate of personal choices as of late. That's when I noticed a gleam of understanding, of connection in her eye. As she told me sincerely and kindly that she cared and she'd be around if I ever needed to talk. Nothing was resolved that day, but traipsing down the front steps of Wiggs Hall, I felt like I had at least one ally who kind of knew what I was going through. She saw me worthy of investment, and I felt it. 40 years later, the past 36 of them sober, I still hold this teacher dear to my heart. Every time we run into one another, I see that same gleam, that same connection, that same smile in her eye that I saw that spring day in 1986. Mary Ann Drake made a difference. Yet how often do we professors pause and take the time to do things like this with our own students? Or are we distracted by other duties? Department chairs and assessment directors may not want to hear this, but when placed next to the mental health of our students, How important really is a freaking research agenda? The research agenda is a thing. Curriculum is a thing. Pedagogy is a thing. Our students, however, are human beings. There just might be a bigger picture here beyond the mechanics of instructional delivery. True human bonding simply cannot be measured by an assessment or a GACE exam. As if a number could even begin to measure a human being's worth. A number? You see where I'm going with this? Even in higher education, exceptional teaching is about who we are, not what we teach. It's about the bonds we nurture with students. And if this idea, this concept could be true, might our approaches to educating pre-service teachers warrant some re-examination? These are hard questions, but they are essential questions. How often do we pause and really teach pre-service teachers how to build and nurture authentic relationships with children? Is relationship building even a substantive part, an element of our teacher prep programs? Is it a substantive part of your teacher program? Or do we instead obsess over high-impact practices, aligning content with standards and curriculum? Seriously, how important is creating the perfect lesson plan if what really matters is building community among our students? We know that curricula come and curricula go, but meaningful relationships with teachers and students can last a lifetime. When he was 92 years old, my colleague, mentor, friend, and middle school pioneer, Dr. John Lounsbury, may have said it best when he dropped into my class one day in 2016. He reflected, "I would rather have the best teacher teaching the worst curriculum than the worst teacher teaching the best curriculum." John then told my room full of student teachers, "You are the only lesson the students will learn. What you value, how you behave, what you laugh at. We teach more by who we are than by what we teach." Shortly after I left the real world of P-12 education for this alternate reality we call higher education, my friend Craig Smith used to call it college world. He's like, "This is way different from where you've been, Sumowski." I found myself assigned to teach a foundations class in special education dealing with the origins and principles of special ed law. You no doubt remember PL 94-142, right? Okay. In this class sat a quiet, introverted student who barely spoke. She was painfully shy. She didn't do well on the tests. Other than my speaking briefly with her one day after class when she seemed a little upset, there wasn't a great deal of interaction between us. I have 100 weird rituals in my life. One is that if an old friend and family member or student comes to mind, I take that as a sign that I'm supposed to contact them. So I reached out to her. When I texted this former student a few years after graduation to touch base, she sent me a reply I could have never seen coming. Her text message started with something like, "Dr. Sumowski, I remember you from the times I struggled in college." Then she gave me an update on her life before closing with the words, "I will never forget the day that you told me that I matter. You truly saved my life that day." It never occurred to me that our brief encounter on one day in passing after class could possibly have had any impact at all. Yet somehow it did. And all I conveyed to her was, "You matter." Her text message struck me like a brick and simultaneously scared the daylights out of me. Even though our brief conversation after class seemed like such a little thing, I've come to realize that perhaps there really are no little things when it comes to the impact of relationships when teaching. So where does that leave us? Not unlike the over-exuberant parents of our Gen Z college students, maybe we could all benefit from boarding our own figurative helicopters to take a global view of our impact on pre-service teachers from the 5,000-foot level. Perhaps it would remind us that there is a bigger picture here, a greater mission. we might see more clearly that lasting, impactful teaching is not about the lessons we create, the curricula we design, the research we conduct, or the grades we assign, all of which will one day turn to dust. Instead, it's about the interpersonal relationships we create when we invest in our students. I'd like to share a story that illustrates how one faculty-student relationship led to and ultimately dovetailed with a pretty special P-12 teacher-student relationship. Amidst my long journey through college and my lost journey through college, I had a few steady friends, one of whom is here today. Thank you, Steve, for coming, Steve Bristol. Another was songwriter Leighton Moore, my roommate and musical duo partner during my senior year of undergrad. We shared some crazy adventures traveling and playing music that might best be disclosed on another day. After college, I moved toward my fledgling career teaching kids with disabilities, while Leighton went off to study law before settling in Decatur. Now, 20 years later, and shortly after I joined the faculty at GCSU in 2011, Leighton's wife, Martha, gave birth to a beautiful baby girl named Judy. A most outgoing and wondrous soul, Judy has cardiofasciocutaneous syndrome. This is a rare and incurable genetic disorder with an uncertain prognosis that affects less than 1,000 people on the planet. Though her health can be fragile at times, Judy's a successful special ed student in middle school. She spreads sunshine throughout the lives of everyone she encounters. During a routine phone call with Leighton years later, 2 years ago, he told me Judy had been progressing beautifully at Beacon Hill Middle School in Decatur, thanks to the influence of a transformative and gifted young special ed teacher named Mrs. Strower, who had built a deeply meaningful connection with Judy. Hearing this, I did a verbal double take and asked Leighton to repeat the teacher's name. Mrs. Strower, he said. I said, her first name wouldn't happen to be Laura, would it? Yeah, Laura Strower. What, you heard of her? Indeed I had. Laura Varley Strower was a 2019 graduate of my special education cohort at GCSU. As her mentor leader, I worked closely with her during every semester of her 2-year journey to become a special ed teacher. Our cohort operated like a family. I replied, dude, Laura's one of mine. Quite surprised, Leighton said, no way. Laura remains Judy's teacher at Beacon Hill Middle School today. While she had been one heck of a student teacher, Laura's eventual impact in the classroom hit closer to home than I ever expected. It was a full circle moment. One could not have scripted more perfectly. Perhaps sometimes we do get to see the real world impact that results from the work we do at the college level. In the final analysis, no teacher has a crystal ball. We cannot possibly know every challenge affecting the students standing before us. As for our impact, the truth is we rarely know when we're having impact, or whether we're having any impact at all. Life is like that, isn't it? And sometimes we learn of somebody we might have touched or some influence we may have had only years later. As we move forward in this mission to prepare the next generation of teachers, may we never forget that the responsibility we teachers carry in our hands and communicate through our voices is truly profound. Our words and actions can have the impact of building people up or breaking them down. We can inspire students to climb to places they never thought attainable, or we can shatter them like glass. So as we reflect upon the theme of this year's GATE conference, to shape the future of education together, let us commit ourselves to doing everything we can to invest in our pre-service teachers like never before. Let us build and maintain our own meaningful relationships with our students. Then we can help them develop skill sets that will allow them to, in turn, do the same with their own students. all the students who find their way into their classrooms and into their hearts. What could possibly matter more?
Dr. Sumowski, thank you so much.
My
That was
pleasure.
so inspiring.
Thank you. It's
Yeah.
so good to see you.
You brought to light the joy that we get as being professors and as teachers and what really matters between us and our students. Thank you so much.
I'm grateful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate being invited.
6 years ago, I was